The microSD slot existed because older phones just did not have that much storage. Early Galaxy S and Note phones often shipped with 8GB all the way to 64GB, which sounds small now, but at the time people were already filling up their phones with photos, music, apps, and eventually 4K videos. So you could buy the cheaper phone, add more storage later, move files between devices, and just keep everything locally without needing cloud storage. Early on, this gave Samsung its identity of being more flexible compared to iPhones, especially for photographers. But in 2015, Samsung removed it from the Galaxy S6. That phone looked much more premium with a glass back and a thinner design, but it also removed the microSD slot alongside a few other features for more internal space. A lot of people saw this as Samsung trying to be too much like Apple and losing their flexible features that made Galaxy phones different. And Samsung clearly noticed because the Galaxy S7 brought microSD back just 1 year later, but the feature slowly became less guaranteed as the smaller Note 10 dropped it, and then in 2021, the entire Galaxy S21 lineup removed it for good. By then, internal storage was faster, cloud services were more normal, and Samsung could just sell higher storage models instead, but people still complain today about the lack of control, which does make sense. The removable battery was one of the classic early Android features. On older Samsung phones, you could remove the plastic back and pull out the battery to replace it yourself. Obviously good for dying batteries, but if your phone completely froze, you could actually pull the battery to force a restart, all which at the time was a huge advantage. Galaxy phones felt more practical and flexible than iPhones because you could actually repair and maintain them yourself instead of everything being sealed. The best example of this was actually probably the Galaxy S5 in 2014, which had the removable battery, the previously mentioned microSD slot, and even water resistance, which is important because people often assume removable batteries disappeared because of water resistance, but you could have both. The actual problem was just that it made the phone a little thicker and less elegant. Then in 2015, the Galaxy S6 had the removable plastic back replaced with a sealed glass design, and the removable battery disappeared. The phone looked much more premium, but it also felt like an iPhone and became less repairable. Unlike the microSD slot, Samsung never brought the removable battery back. Sealed phones gave them more room for things like wireless charging and also larger batteries, so this was a win to the average consumer, but not to the more technical one. The headphone jack was a feature that was sort of standard on all phones, you never really questioned it. You could easily plug in anything from wired headphones to car aux cables, and even though all phones had this at the time, it fit Samsung's power user identity. Phones had replaced MP3 players, iPods, and portable media players, so headphone jack was simply expected. Bluetooth also was not nearly as good back then, with worse battery life, higher latency, and unreliable pairing, so wired audio was still the better option for a lot of people. What made Samsung's eventual decision more awkward was that they had spent years making fun of Apple for removing it. After Apple dropped the headphone jack with the iPhone 7 in 2016, Samsung ran ads pointing out that Galaxy users did not need dongles. But in 2019, Samsung started doing the same exact thing. The Galaxy S10 was the last flagship S series to keep the headphone jack, before the Note 10 removed it later that year. Then in 2020, the Galaxy S20 removed it from the S lineup as well. From that point on, Samsung pushed people towards USB-C audio and wireless earbuds instead. It made sense as Bluetooth improved and fit the identity of Apple, but went against what users expected from Samsung, which led to more backlash. MST was one of Samsung's coolest features that only Samsung could do, which made it very special. It stands for Magnetic Secure Transmission, and it let Samsung Pay work on many older card terminals that did not even support Tap to Pay. So instead of relying on only NFC, the phone could imitate the magnetic stripe on a physical credit card. So you could hold your Galaxy near the card reader and it would often process the payment as if you had swiped your actual card. This was quite innovative and something other phones didn't have. Back in 2015, contactless payments were still far from everywhere, so Samsung bought a company called Loop Pay and used its technology to make Galaxy phones work with both old and new payment terminals, which gave Samsung a genuine advantage over Apple Pay and Google Pay. It didn't work as consistently as Tap to Pay does today, but I bet it felt cool to get use out of it and makes me wish I had a Samsung at that time just to experience being better than everyone else. MST stayed around from the Galaxy S6 all the way to the S20 series before Samsung finally removed it with the Galaxy S21 in 2021. By then, contactless payments had just become much more common, so the feature was no longer as useful as it once was and was just taking up space, but you probably can understand why a lot of people missed this feature. The iris scanner is something that most people associate with the Apple Vision Pro, but Samsung phones actually used to have it. It scanned the unique pattern of your eyes with infrared hardware, and it was unlike anything Apple was offering at the time. Samsung introduced it on the Galaxy Note 7 in 2016. As phones started getting bigger screens and smaller bezels, fingerprint readers built into the front front home button were becoming a problem, so iris scanning gave another secure way to unlock your phone without needing that button. And it could also be used for everything else that required your fingerprint. Unfortunately, its debut could not have gone much worse, as the Note 7 got recalled because of its battery failures, so the iris scanner ended up being attached to one of Samsung's biggest disasters instead of becoming its next big feature. Samsung still kept it around on the Galaxy S8 to the Note 9, where it became a useful alternative after the fingerprint scanner was moved to the back of the phone. Later models even combined it with face unlock through intelligent scan. The problem was that it never felt quite as seamless as a fingerprint reader. There were enough times where you had to hold the phone at the right angle, or where things like glasses or bright sunlight made it unreliable. And in 2019, Samsung introduced an in-display fingerprint scanner on the Galaxy S10, making the iris scanner unnecessary and eventually removed. Buying a Galaxy flagship always felt complete. Inside the box, you would usually find the phone, a charging brick, a USB cable, wired earphones, and the usual papers. You could take it out, charge it, plug in your headphones, and just start using it straight away. That was just the expectation back then for most quality phones. Charging standards changed all the time, so including a charger guaranteed everything worked properly. And before wireless earbuds took over, wired earphones were still the default. Samsung even bundled AKG-tuned headphones with some of its flagships, making the whole package more premium. Then in 2020, Apple removed the charger and earpods from the iPhone 12, claiming it was better for the environment. Samsung mocked Apple for it at first, just like it had done with the headphone jack, but 1 year later with the Galaxy S21 in 2021, Samsung also stopped including both the charging brick and wired earphones. The company said it reduced waste and that most people already owned chargers, which is probably true to some extent, but it also saved Samsung money and encouraged people to buy chargers or Galaxy Buds separately, especially when the phone price remained the same. Once again, people just saw this as Samsung following what everyone else was doing, especially Apple, and many thought it was a greedy and an unnecessary change. The rear fingerprint scanner, which I mentioned before, was Samsung's weird transition between the old home button era and the in-display fingerprint scanners they have today. Samsung wanted slimmer bezels and bigger screens, but it still needed somewhere to put the fingerprint sensor. Before this, Galaxy phones had the scanner built into the physical home button, which people quickly got used to and felt natural for the thumb. But with the Galaxy S8 in 2017, Samsung removed the front home button to make room for its new Infinity display. But since the in-display fingerprint scanners were not ready yet, the sensor had to move to the back. This idea itself was not a problem, but Samsung put it right beside the rear camera, making it very awkward to reach and incredibly easy to just smudge the camera lens by accident. It was so stupid that it became one of the biggest complaints about the S8. Samsung listened and fixed it with the Galaxy S9, moving the scanner below the camera where it was much easier to use. And despite the initial criticism, rear fingerprint scanners were actually quite fast and even supported gestures like swiping down to open the notification panel. But the whole rear fingerprint era only lasted a couple of years as better tech came out, and in 2019, Samsung introduced its in-display fingerprint scanner with the Galaxy S10, moving the sensor back to the front without bringing back the home button. The notification LED was a pretty tiny feature that nobody really talked about. It was a small blinking light on the front of the phone that could tell you if you had a missed call, a new message, a low battery, or if the phone was charging, even when the screen was off. This was basically a small version of always on display. If your phone was sitting on a desk, you could glance across the room and instantly know if something had happened. It barely used any battery, and on some phones, different colors meant different types of notifications. It was a very practical feature which wasn't flashy but became an expected part of the phone over time. The notification LED stayed on Galaxy flagships for years, from phones like the Galaxy S3 all the way to the S9. But as Samsung kept shrinking the bezels and pushing for an all-screen design, there was less space for extra hardware on the front of the phone. So with the Galaxy S10 in 2019, Samsung finally removed it and instead added the actual always on display and edge lighting to do the same job. It's definitely a different feeling from just having a small light, but people have adapted and most actually preferred the new changes. But I'm curious which changes you like or hate, so leave a comment, share the video with your friends, even those who use iPhones, I don't care, just send it to everyone, and thank you for watching.